Kia ora koutou katoa, nā mihi nui kia koutou. No mai, haere mai, welcome to this hui, this e-hui, this zui, where we're having a fantastic kōrero about a really important kaupapa, and that is our Aotearoa food parcel measure developed by our partners and friends at Kore Hiakai. So we just want to start with a karakia. It's a fairly well-known one, so feel free to say it with us wherever you are across the motu, if you know it. So anyway, tātou. Tui e ronga, tui e raro, tui e waho, tui e roto, tui te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka ronga te ao, homi e, hui e, tāki e. So yes, welcome once again to this hui. It's fantastic to have you here from across the motu. We do acknowledge that this is an incredibly busy time of year. I mean, just for everyone, let alone for our community food sector, which we know is just under the pump at the moment. We especially think of our people who've been under level 3 and 4 lockdowns across the country for some periods of time, especially of course of Auckland and the Waikato. So our hearts go out to you guys. We just know the incredible mahi that you guys have been doing. And so if you are watching this live, our aroha goes to you right now. My name is Neill Ballantyne, and I'm a senior advisor with MSD, Ministry of Social Development, and the Food Secure Communities team, a team that was set up obviously post-COVID, our first COVID lockdown, as a response to ensure that communities across our country that are affected by COVID are supported to be able to access emergency kai throughout this period, but well as looking forward and trying to build that food security into the future for our communities. And I'm joined by a new co-host from Kore Hiakai, who I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Kia ora, Neill, thank you. Kia ora koutou, everyone. So thankful to have you all here. Just want to again to welcome you into this forum, into this space, and for taking the time to join us. Kia ora to our monohiri as well, to Gavin and to Zucchi for joining this kōrero too. Really lovely to have you all here. I think we'll have a really nice cohesive conversation. It's a good flow. It will have a little good talk about the actual Aotearoa standard parcel measure itself. We'll have a chat with Zucchi about the measure in use, who's a pilot organisation, and then ultimately we'll leave it with Gavin to sort of have a chat about some of those procurement conversations that we need to have. So kia ora, thank you for having me. Tammie, Stroman, is actually my full name. I work for Kore Hiakai as a kai tui kōrero. So my title is as the weaver of the stories and of the narratives within this food system space, particularly some of those champion stories around creating food security itself in those conversations. So I think that's probably a good way for us to sort of lean into getting straight into actually talking about the measure. I think we may need to do a screen share at some point.
Got a couple more little homework things to do as we go.
We do.
So yes, I see someone has already jumped in the chat. They must have been with us in previous sessions. So what we'd love you to do now is introduce yourselves. So you can use the chat function down below, type your name in there, maybe tell a little bit about yourselves, maybe where you're from and what your mahi is, and perhaps if that links into this food space, tell us how that happens. That way we can see who's part of the zui, part of the kōrero, and you guys can connect either now or later, especially with people nearby yourselves or involved in similar kind of kaupapa or similar mahi in this space. So yes, please feel free, jump in the chat, introduce yourselves, let us know who you are and what you're up to. And just to let you know, there hopefully will be an opportunity for Q&A as we go along. So after each presenter, if there is time, we'll allow for some questions. So use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So there's a chat function for the general stuff, and then a Q&A for asking a direct question to one of the presenters. Kia ora Donna, kia ora Mary, kia ora Dawn. Welcome to the Zui, and thanks for jumping in the chat. You're all very welcome. Oh, Akari from down south. It's
fantastic.
Nice to see you
all popping in.
Otamahonga. Oh, love to you guys. It's been a busy time.
Yeah.
So yeah, fantastic. Welcome all. So I'm now going to try and get your screen up and going so that we can run your PowerPoint, and then we'll hand it over to Tammie.
Keep adding, Trish and Jenny has just joined us from Kore Hiakai. Kia ora, whānau. Nice to see you here. Get that up.
I believe. Shit.
Cool. So I'm good to drive now, yeah?
Yeah, good to drive, I think.
Yes. Excellent. Right, here we are. So we're going to talk about what is the Aotearoa standard food parcel measure.
Oh, we thought you were good to drive. There you go. Okay, there you go. Mousy. That's the way to go.
Thank you, Neil. All right, so just a little bit of a build in to actually how we got here and why we decided we needed to measure our food parcels. So it's kind of that COVID conversation. We've been sitting here in this state of uncertainty for quite a while now, but in the weeks leading up to the March 2020 COVID lockdown, a lot of food banks throughout Aotearoa started experiencing really increased demand for food parcels. And by the second week of that lockdown, food banks were beginning to report double and in some cases triple and up to quadruple at some point in demand for food parcels. So it clearly had just catapulted and escalated to quite a big extra proportion of support. We had actually no network that was responsible for gathering some of that information in terms of nationally what the level of food parcel support was. And so that's kind of how those conversations started out, just with seeing the increased demand. We were trying to get some accurate idea on what the potential increased level of food insecurity that there was in our communities. And the government was kind of wanting to know an exact figure on how much food people were actually needing. And so pretty much that's how we got to the point of needing to develop this. We do have to use a mouse, bear with me.
Yeah. There we go.
So it was not shortly after that kind of March insight that a survey went out into the sector. This was actually pre my time at Kore Hiakai. So this was led by the Po Arahi Trish Malcolm. It went out nationally across the country. So we had this geographic location right from Northland right down to the bottom of Southland and all those in between. So it was a really good catchment of the country and a fairly good indication for what people were doing. So when we put that piece of survey out, this was a really easy snapshot on what you could see, how different people defined what their food parcel was. Nearly, actually 100% of the organisations that we talked to had a different definition of a food parcel. We put the sector out to 40 odd different organisations and we had about an 80% capture rate on that. So it's a good indication of what's going on around the country. So as you can see, the length of days that a food parcel lasted, the number of people a food parcel was supposed to feed, and particularly the variances within the nutritional elements were just so varied. There was actually no consistent definition of what an actual food parcel was. So when it came time to quantifying the number of food parcels that were being dispensed, we couldn't give an accurate figure on that. Thank you, Neil. I might even get you to drive that, but this mouse is not my thing. Okay, so the recommendations that we've put forth from Kore Hiakai, which sits in the part one, I suppose, piece of work that we did, which was called What is a Food Parcel? It's the actual research document itself. That was all wisdom insights from people around the country. None of these recommendations or findings were in isolation from Kore Hiakai. They were literally what the country told us. And so that's how we actually got to our recommendations. So 80% of those that we reached out to and participated in the research survey actually did share exactly what they were doing, and that led us directly to being able to determine the length of size, the length of days, and the number of people that we could recommend that a standard food parcel should be called. And I suppose that's where there's this new languaging that kicks in. So when there's people, we've talked about food parcels before, But in terms of Kore Hiakai languaging, we've been referring to the standard food parcel. And I suppose that's just a little bit of a key difference for us to be aware of. The actual survey itself, though, as I said, it really raised a lot of discrepancies in terms of especially the nutritional value. And so after we went away and we got all your insights and we analysed that, we prototyped what we thought would be a good recommendation. And then we went away and we sought some additional nutritional advice from dietitian and nutritional experts in terms of what would be good recommended daily intakes for healthy ingestion. And that itself, all of that data and all of that insight and all of that professional and collective wisdom directly went into the recommendations for us to say what is the Aotearoa standard food parcel measure. So what is the definition? So I suppose if we had to just actually cleanly define what is a food parcel, and again, based off the research and averages of what the rest of the country, or actually what the country was doing. So we define a standard food parcel as being for 4 people, and that's usually a demographic of made up 2 for 2, 2 adults, 2 children. It should, and there's some merits behind these numbers as well, which we'll get to later with the matrix. So a standard food parcel should cover for 4 people. It should cover 4 days. It should cover a provision for 3 meals a day. And one of the things that's really pertinent is that a food parcel is meant to be a temporarily, it's a temporary relief and support system. And so it's kind of meant to be complementary to what a whānau already has on board, which is why you have that 4-day number, because it's sort of meant to subsidise what is already accessible or within whānau means. We put a 12-week duration cap on that because we understand that food parcels are actually just a temporary response. They don't actually create food. They don't create long-term sustainable food security itself. They temporarily offer some relief, which is why we did put a 12-week number on it. But having been in the social service space for a long time, we know that individually, when we're delivering, that those numbers may be different for the whānaus that we deal with. So that's one of the great things about this measure, is that it can be quite adaptable, and it still leaves a lot of autonomy for food banks and organisations to still do what they do to support their whānau best. But we still had to come with a starting point and some sort of provisions for us to base what we're going to be making consistent. So yeah, a temporary response, and I suppose the biggest thing that came out of that was nutritional adequacy. So we had this sort of line that came up in the research itself, that table scraps is not okay for the poor. It really isn't. Most of the people who are receiving these food parcels are already marginalised across a span of social and health capacities. So the least we can do in this conversation is actually offer them some support that is nutritionally adequate and actually going to aid in their well-being and not just fill bellies. So it's as simple as 4 people. The reason why we came down to 4, again, it was one of those average. Some people compiled their food parcels for 1 to 2 people. Some had different sizes, some had 4, some up to 8. So we just had to choose an average. So we landed with 4 people, and it's a number that's easy to multiply and divide, which will be imperative later on down the track. So it's for 4 people, 3 meals a day, and again, breakfast, lunch and dinner, and that 4 days a week. So again, you can see at number 4, if you wanted to make it a week's worth of a parcel and not just a subsidy itself, you could double that, and you could see how you could easily use those numbers to actually do that. Or if it was a smaller whānau or a single or an individual, you could then divide those numbers and it would keep it nice and clean. And at the very minimum, so after we went away and we said what a food parcel, or what we recommended, and invited community organisation distributors to define as a standard food parcel, we then said that the content of that should actually meet about 80% of the nutritional standard guidelines. So the guidelines that we compiled and put together in the part 2 piece of work, which was the What is a Food Parcel Nutritional Guide, they were a direct translation of quite a hefty document that was produced by the Ministry of Health. again, going back to our government agents and experts, that was already accessible to the eating and activities guidelines. So we literally just translated what those averages were for an average person to come up with the guides. So they're really credible. The Ministry of Health itself bases that off international research, and within a global frame, it sits really nicely in what would be nutritional intake. And that's pretty much the matrix. So we have invited, as of July of this year, we officially launched the Aotearoa Standard Food Parcel Measure, literally in the building that I'm sitting in now. And yes, and so the matrix is really simple. A standard food parcel should provide for 4 people, 3 meals a day for 4 days a week at 80% of the nutritional standards that we've set here in Aotearoa. One of the big conversations that comes up within our space is about the ability for whānau to access kai with dignity. And a big part of that accessing of kai with dignity is having a choice element and a model of that incorporated in. We do know from the survey data, and also just anecdotally, many of us have actually been in that food parcel distribution space with DNL, that so much of what goes into a food parcel usually comes down to what the food bank actually has to put in that. So it's to do with the donations or maybe the storage of their facility. So when we looked at the compilation of a food parcel, we recognized that we needed to have these 3 elements that were absolutely considered. Just logistically, what did the food bank actually have to put in that parcel? How could whānau have some choice within that to eliminate some of those waste conversations that we have? And then also, how can we responsibly compile this so that there's a good nutritional intake for whānau? So with that said, we invited community food organisations and food bank to use this measure that we launched in July, which you can use to measure against the parcels that you're actually currently compiling. At this point in the conversation, we're inviting people to actually trial that measure as a way of quantifying what you're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change your current practice, although it may lean more towards how you can make those parcels a bit healthier if you're feeling that they are falling short for what the standard may recommend. And if you're unable to actually have those be able to satisfy a nutritional element, to raise the questions why, and how we may be able to help facilitate some of those conversations with procurement and rescue, which is obviously where people like Gavin come into the conversation. So pretty much if you have decided that you would like to use this measure and you start to compile your food parcels themselves based off that measure, the next stage for us would be to actually start to gather that data up and to count it. Part of that counting will give us an indication, and it's not going to be a standalone measure, but it will give us some indication for the level of food insecurity that's actually in the community by way of food volume through the food parcels that are dispensed. So once people come on board and they start using that, we're going to be reviewing that over the next couple of months, up to the next 12 months, and we'll work with the New Zealand Food Network and different hubs and different people around the country to see how we can start to procure some of those items that are needed to compile really healthy food parcels themselves. And Kore Hiakai have offered to be the ones that gather that data and to present that in a way that actually we can share that to have some indication for the number of parcels that are going out there, and for us to be able to use that to catalyst further conversations to ideally start to have those systemic conversations on how we improve this and make it better. So all of the stuff that I've talked about today, you can actually access through the Kore Hiakai website. And I do invite you, if you wanted to, in the comments, give me your email address or want to have a further conversation about how your organisation may be to onboard that tool. This is a good time before Christmas to start laying those conversations, and I'm very, really happy to do that. Please have a look at the actual research. It will give you really, really good insight as to your data, as in the people who contributed to the survey, how we got to the key findings and the recommendations that we did. It just fleshes out a little bit more, and it's a palatable and insightful view. None of it will probably surprise you, but it's good to solidify having some actual good tangible data to talk about. And the actual part 2, what is the nutritional guide, is a super, super user-friendly, easy document to read. Again, downloadable off our website, and it gives you all those really imperative insights on how you may be able to adjust your food parcels or to have a little bit more of a nutritional value to them. Yeah, we can go to next. So I'm pretty much just about wrapped up. What I did want to end on was to say that when we actually did our sector survey, we noted that nearly 80% of those surveyed in the what is the food parcel research had to apply some type of judgment based on of the goods that they had in order to actually address the nutritional aspect of their food parcels. It wasn't just that they had all this wonderful fresh produce that they could put in. They really had to use some judgment. There was only 12% of those who had been surveyed. I beg your pardon, 4 of the 34 that came back used a nutritional guide. 12% didn't even address nutrition at all, and all of those in between made some attempt, but based off judgment. The point was that nearly everyone who couldn't regularly include fresh produce into their food parcels, it came down to either funding or procurement. It was that simple. They just couldn't get their hands on it. So that's the Aotearoa food parcel measure in a nutshell, in a very, very quick kind of analysis. It will be interesting to start to talk to one of the pilot organisations who've got it in use, and that will give us some further good insight into that. But we probably do have time for a few questions.
Absolutely, you've done very well. You're bang on time, Tammie, so gold points for that. So we've got about 3 minutes for questions. I might kick in with the first one, but just a reminder to our participants to please use that Q&A function in the bottom of your screen if you have a question for Tammie. There may be some time at the end as well after you've had time to listen to the other presenters, but if you've got any questions now for Tammie, please do chuck them in. So I'm going to kick off with one question though, which is what we actually discussed before this webinar, which is around the dairy component for the nutritional guide, because I think that's something that's quite surprising for many people, right? When they see the amount of dairy that is recommended from a nutritional perspective.
Yes.
And we're having quite an interesting conversation about the different ways in which that can be met or the different ways that can be supplemented. So I was wondering if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, of all the food groupings that came up between veggie, fruit, grains, proteins, dairy's probably been the one that's been the most topical and the one that we've had the most interesting feedback about. So while we do have kind of a standard guideline, which would be really good in nutritional intake, there's a lot of ways in which dairy can actually be met. The examples that we have given in the nutritional guide itself, they're just one example, and you know, a glass of milk can equal a slice of cheese and different things like that. So that's something to bear in mind, that how you actually achieve those levels can look quite different per organisation. Also, we've had some feedback, specific feedbacks from different communities who have maybe challenged us on what is appropriate for their communities. For example, Pacifica communities have especially told us that dairy is a debatable topic with them in terms of the amount of dairy that is recommended. So I think that what's really good about this measure is that it is quite adaptable to what you do. We're asking you to quantify your food parcels and not necessarily to heavily change your practice in the first instance. So I think what still needs to happen is you still have to tailor things, and you still have to put food parcels together with what's appropriate for the whānaus that you're supporting. But yeah, dairy will be an interesting conversation about that. And also too, I guess it comes down to the type of dairy. You know, not all food banks have got fridge and storage units where they can put fresh milk in. And so, you know, there's different ways that you may need to supplement that. But dairy will be an interesting conversation for all of you when you probably look at using that.
And your examples in the guide are just that, right? They're just examples. So
they are
it's
just
got the bottles of milk
examples.
there, but it could be cheese or it could be other forms of dairy as well.
Yeah, and what we found as an actual test example, so when we put together the nutritional guide, part of that was based off an inventory of what food banks directly told us through the survey that they received. Obviously, things like canned goods came up as quite heavily featured. So when we have gone and given examples of, say, your daily intake that you may need for a whānau, those numbers can look quite staggering when they're translated to cans. What I will say is when we, Kore Hiakai, hand on heart, went and put together a standard food parcel, we actually found, including things like fresh produce, looked quite different to having 6 cans next to, say, a head of collie, and they may be equivalent in value. So it's just, these are just examples. They're not be-all end-alls. They're not meant to be static. They're dynamic, and the way that you achieve that will be down to what you can get your hands on, what's in your region, what's accessible, and a huge part of that will be what is suitable to the whānau.
Obviously, this is quite complicated when it comes to nutrition, and so it's something we could talk for a very long time, but we'll need to wrap it up. But just very quickly, we have a question here from Deb, who's asked whether or not the survey participants could get some direct sort of feedback about their response to the survey, just in terms of helping them to be able to improve. But I guess in many ways, this is kind of the response, right? Like, this is the gold standard. So
yeah,
we want to be able to improve, and we're working towards this.
Yeah, so that was from Deb Hill, right? Yeah, thank you, Deb, for that. Yes, by all means. The actual research itself is a direct translation of what was submitted, and it literally does include the tables and graphs that of the survey participants. So that itself is your voice, and your voice out of that research is actually what we used to translate and to come up with the nutritional guidelines itself. So yes, so the very short answer to your question is that yes, you certainly, we can gift you back a copy of that. And I think it's actually super important to have a part 2 conversation now that you've raised that, Deb, and I'd really like to have that conversation with you direct after this.
Kia ora. Hey, Tammie, thanks so much for that. It's been really enlightening and good to hear about the whole journey that you've been on with this project, which I know is a bit of a baby for you, and so it's so good to see it coming to fruition, be able to share it with the world through this webinar. So
thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce my dear friend Zucchi from Christchurch City Mission. She's one of my providers in my area, so we get to hang out every now and then, although COVID has put a bit of a pause on that for now. Zucchi has been with the City Mission for 3 years as the Social Services Manager, and has spent the previous 6.5 years as an operational manager for Ronald McDonald House in the South Island. And prior to that, she was a bigwig in the private sector before making the switch into the charitable NGO space. She oversees the food bank as part of her role, and the wonderful, as how she's described it, the wonderful food bank team, and that they are. I can totally talk of that from meeting them. So over to you, Zucchi, to give us some bit of a context about how this can work in practice within your context.
Good, thank you, Neill. Yeah, I guess so. From us as an organisation, you know, and talking about the food bank part of it, we were super excited to be able to be involved with this because, as Tammie says, you know, food parcel distribution varies hugely across the country. So it's so hard to get an absolute directive of how much food we're, as a nation, we're actually giving out. So the way we went about it, we do 3 sizes of food parcels here at the Christchurch City Mission, a yellow, a blue and a red. Now a yellow is for a maximum of 2 people, a blue is a maximum of 4, and the red is a maximum of 6. So we pulled out our blue parcel, which was for 4 people, and we spread it out in the food bank on our table and literally broke it into, you know, your vegetables, your fruits, your grains, your proteins, and your dairy. And we looked at it and sort of saw what were we actually delivering on. You know, did we have sufficient grains in there? Were we, you know, supplying that nutritional value? And like we were really pleased and surprised that we actually were covering the nutritional value really well. Admittedly, that can fluctuate a little bit sometimes, depending, as like any food bank, you know, what you have in stock. But knowing what we were giving out as a standard parcel for 4, that's what we've made as our ballpark, you know, figure. And if we know that we're getting low in a particular food item, like if we are getting low in a protein, then we'll know. That's when we use our relationships, you know, and whether it be NZFN or whoever it might be, relationships that we've built up over the years, that can help supply so that we're never short of a particular food items. So we worked out that we probably, you know, consistently, and as I said, it does fluctuate a little bit, but we worked out consistently that we're giving pretty much 110% of that nutritional food guide. And what I love about it is, you know, and admittedly we're incredibly lucky that we have good chiller space and we have good freezer space. So we have got that ability to store food. But it means that with this standard food parcel, it's not, you don't have to give this, you know, like this is just a guideline, because, you know, we have a wonderful Canterbury Food Bank network down here in the Canterbury, and we all get together every 2 months. And you know, we've got, for instance, the pantry out at New Brighton. You know, they don't have a freezer space, they don't have chiller space, so they're never going to be able to give the standard food parcel as far as nutrition goes. But they give a portion of it, and so they can measure their parcels against this portion. And what excites me about the whole thing is that it is going to be able to tell a narrative on what, as a country, we are actually having to provide to our communities. So I think it's fantastic. And I sit on the Kore Hiakai collective, and as part of that, you know, like it was an incredibly enlightening but fantastic thing to be a part of, and it's great to see it come to fruition, and it's great to see us tracking it in our food bank. I don't know if anyone has any questions around that, or I'm happy just to fire away at anyone that wants to know anything.
Oh, kia ora, Zucchi, thanks for that. Yes, please do use that Q&A function. Do type us a question for Zucchi. At the moment, there are none there, so I would love to have some for Zucchi to answer. But yeah, Zucchi, that must have been quite affirming for you guys in your work, to have this document that says actually what you're doing was, you know, meeting that nutritional requirements. But would you have any advice for some who may have a look at this guide and go, oh, actually, this is going to be pretty hard for us? Do you have any advice around some processes or some people they could lean on, some areas that they could explore?
Look, for us, for food supply, it's all been about relationships, and we've developed that, you know, over a number of years. And as I said, in Christchurch, you know, that was one great thing that came out of the March 2020 lockdown, is that the collaboration that goes on between us all is massive and huge, and we're all about sharing. You know, NZFN down here has been amazing, and Kairos is another one. Kairos Free Store is another one that set up a WhatsApp. And if they get bulk food in, you know, the message goes out, we've got this, who wants what. So there's a lot of that goes on. But I think, you know, like I don't want to ever put any pressure on a food bank that this is what they have to deliver. And I think that's really important. You know, you give the best that you can, because with any food bank, you can only give what you've got. So I think it's really important to, you know, we've got this measure, but if you can't meet that measure, it doesn't matter. You know, you meet what you can. And then it's just a matter of hooking in with other food banks in your areas, and communicating and talking, because you'll all have, you know, your own contacts that you get food supplies from. And, you know, sometimes you get that bulk, you know, you get a bulk delivery of potatoes in potato season, you know, and you know, we could never use all of them. So it's just sharing them out, because you never want to see food wasted. So it's a matter of just, you know, connecting in with other food banks in your area, and making sure that, you know, there's that sharing of food.
And with your 3 different sized parcels, is it easy enough to do the math around sort of, you know, compiling that still with the average in order to sort of keep count?
Yeah, it is pretty much, because with our parcels, we kind of have, you know, the standard, you know, and it fits. It fits in with that nutritional value. We've looked at it. So the standard makeup of the food parcels is as such that it's pretty constant. And we make sure that that tries to remain as pretty constant as ever. You know, the variation really comes in around with your chilled, your fresh and your frozen items. So you're talking, you know, your vegetables, your proteins, your dairy products. I guess for us, probably our biggest challenge is fresh fruit and vegetables.
Right.
You know, it's always a challenge.
And is there a seasonal dynamic to that too, is there?
Totally, you know,
yeah,
yeah, totally. And so that's hard to remain consistent, you know, from, you know, throughout the year. We have a good relationship with the prison down here, men's prison, where we get seeds from Zealandia and Aotearoa, take them to the prison, they grow them, we get the produce back again, and then we can distribute that out in the food parcels. But there again, you know, like anything, it is seasonal. But yeah, fresh produce is always the biggest problem. And look, ideally, if we could have a continual supply of that would be awesome.
We've got a question that's come along for you, which talks about what people actually do with the food parcels once they receive them, and it's asking if you provide any helps with recipes or kind of ideas around how to cook a food parcel.
Yeah, we have done that. We run cooking classes here at the mission. We have a learning and development section where we run cooking classes, and we do that basically off what we provide in the food parcels. So that is an option that people can come to that. We've put in basic recipes, and there's always going to be that element of that will give them something and they won't know what to do with it. And I think one of the biggest things, you know, it's not only you know, questioning, you know, can they cook, but also, you know, what are their cooking facilities like? You know, a lot of people live with just a microwave, you know, or you know, they don't have access to an oven, and some don't even have access to fridges, or if they are, they're communal fridges, and if they put food in there, then it's gone the next day. So there's a whole string of things that that you have to question. We have a system when they're given the parcel, you know, we encourage them to have a look through it, if you know, and if there's something in there that they don't want, to take out and put in. We have a sort of a big bin box area where we distribute our food parcels, to take the product out that they don't want, and if there's something in that bin that they want, then swap it. Within our assessment, when we assess our community, our 4 food parcels, you know, we take a lot of things into account about you know, ethnicity, dietary requirements, you know, and then we, you know, there's always the add-ons of cleaning products, you know, nappies, baby formula, you know, anything like that, dog food, pet food, that we can also throw in as well. But yeah, you're never going to get it perfect. And you know, in the near future, we are going to be looking at a social supermarket. to me, which is a fabulous way to go. And I can't wait for the day where people can come and choose what they want to eat rather than us giving them a box of food and going, here, this is your food parcel.
Sure, and then that's going to be a very interesting challenge for you to apply the measure in a
Yes.
social supermarket space where people have all the choice in the world. So.
Yeah, exactly. So therein lies the problem. But you know, what a wonderful problem to have.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Oh, kia ora, Zucchi. Hey, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure if anyone have any follow-up questions, you'll be okay for people to contact you directly.
Absolutely, please do. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, Zucchi's a wealth of knowledge, so please do take that opportunity. Yeah. Cheers, Zucchi, and hopefully catch you in the South Island again soon, eh?
Look forward to it. Thanks, Neill.
Cool. That's it.
Right, we're running so good to time here, actually. You did really well there, Zucchi. That was super insightful. Thank you for that. There is a quick question that's come up from Emma Cummings, and I'll get back to you now. Emma, it's a good question. I just want to introduce Gavin, who's next in this conversation. So Gavin and I have sat in a few spaces talking, having this conversation, but Gavin is the NZFM CEO. He joined the New Zealand Food Network from a varied career spanning the travel, aviation, business and logistics sector. As a former officer in the Royal Air Force, which was the UK base. So Gavin has spent time working with vulnerable communities and individuals across all corners of the globe. You'll hear that lovely accent when he kicks in, an experience which still today continues to fuel his passion for making a difference and for Aotearoa, to have secure food secure communities. So thank you. Welcome, Gavin, and it's all yours now.
Kia ora, Tammie. Thanks for those kind words. I'm sure somebody else must have written them down rather than myself. Kia ora, everyone. As Tammie says, I'm CEO of New Zealand Food Network, and one of the challenges that we had when we set up the Food Network was to really understand what is needed by the community. You've heard quite often that food banks, food rescue services give out what they get. And that's great because obviously there's a lot of supply and a lot of food that does need rescuing rather than going to landfill. But ideally, we'd like to target what people need and what is required. So when Kore Hiakai started to develop the idea of what's in a food parcel, we kind of looked at that and thought, this could be a very good way to allow us to try and target specific groups of foods that can be core to the needs of those that are vulnerable. I'm just going to share you just a kind of a little spreadsheet that we've started to put together because the data is very young and very, very raw, and we're still kind of evolving into that space. I'll just kind of show you what we are looking at. So Neill, just can you thumbs up? Can you see that okay? Whoops. Can you see that okay? Sorry, I froze it, yeah. So kind of what we're looking at here is we've taken the Kore Hiakai main components and servings with units and or weights. Scale that to a year's basis and then come back down to what is required on a weekly basis on a national scale. What can we currently supply and what are the gaps? So this is the gaps at the moment. So just to put that in a little bit more detail and context, this is a list of the categories that we ourselves measure. So obviously, we do a little bit more than the 5 categories that's in the food parcel. Highlighted are those volumes per week that over the last year, we've been able to source. We've then tried to look at all the food hubs that we deal with and what are the weekly food parcels. Now, some of these numbers, a lot of these numbers, 99% of these need to be verified, and we will be coming we're trying to develop an understanding of how we get these numbers together. At the moment, we measuring on maybe the Food Network is about a 30% supply of all supply of that particular food outlets, but we can in time actually stipulate what each hub says to us that our volumes are. So then we bring that all back to an overall view that using the Kore Hiakai measurement from a fresh vegetable perspective on a standard for an average person, 4 people food box, we require 27 tons of vegetables. We mainly work in the fresh space, but obviously if it was in cans, it'd be 78,000 tons. In our current supply, we're running at 23 tons per week. So we're short about 4 tons per week based on those guesstimated numbers. Now we want to really get this tool to become a bit more sophisticated in terms of the data that we can have so that we can really try and forecast. And as Zucchi has said, the seasonality means that at times you'll never be able to meet those needs. But as you can see currently, based on some very, very broad estimates, we're short across the market in all areas. Now, grains, I've put down here, the measurements in loaves of bread, our measurement would be in breakfast cereal because we don't supply bread because most organizations can get bread themselves. Dairy, we've already discussed dairy, it's in litres of milk. We measure in kilograms of all dairy that we get, but 1 litre equals 1 kilogram. So the relationship is relatively close here. So across the board, given these food parcel numbers that we've guesstimated against the categories of food that we get in, we are short. Now that is not surprising, and I'll stop sharing. That's not surprising given the level of demand and given that we're evolving into the food supply space to get more and more and more donations and products as people become more, as companies become more knowledgeable of what we are doing and how we are supporting the network. So it's a really good tool for us to target food that is required. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances underneath that. We're talking about cultural products and different volumes of, in some areas, it might be 2 parcels per family. So there's a lot more work still to be done, but I think it's a fantastic start as a tool, as a guide for us to target those food areas where it's actually needed. So kia ora for that.
Hey, cheers, Gavin. I appreciate your mahi. And I was having a little bit of a giggle as you're getting away because you have told me in the past you're a bit of a data nerd. And, of course, you're going to bring out an Excel spreadsheet and talk us through the numbers. So appreciate the detail, and I'm sure everyone else will. So again, please use our Q&A function. We do have time for questions. Try and keep on topic in regards to how NZFM does apply this food parcel measure. But Gavin, what just really struck me was the amount, obviously, in the gap in the dairy side, which is bizarre, right? Because we're a dairy producing nation. That's one of our biggest exports. So why can't you get hold of that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Neill, because we've potentially got a solution. So obviously, if you're talking milk, milk's one of those shelf life products that if it is started to become surplus and can't be sold, it's getting quite towards the end of its shelf life. So to be able to take that product and get it through a system like ours, and then right out into the community, right out into the people, does take some time. So that's a challenge from a fresh milk perspective. However, powder milk's a different matter. And we are working on a solution with Fonterra to really get a very, very good, steady, week by week amount of donated milk powder into the community. Now, milk powder is one of those products that people kind of maybe bulk at. But in terms of the quality and the nutrition, it's actually as good as the fresh product. And that's maybe an education piece that maybe needs to get out into the community. But in terms of a product to use, it's fantastic from our perspective because it's got a shelf life. It's got the same nutritional value. Therefore, we can store, hold, and distribute as we need out into the community. So that's coming.
Excellent. And how about other things like, I guess, cheese and yogurts and these kinds of things? Is that sort of other areas where we can sort of fill that deficit in terms of the dairy side of the food package?
Absolutely. Again, it's time critical and time sensitive in order to do that. So that's why it's not as prevalent, I think. So again, it's a knowledge into the community that we are here to be able to do that for them. A lot of the time it's just getting dumped. So we are gaining a lot more traction in that space. I think interestingly, when you look at 12 litres of milk / dairy for a family of 4 for 4 days equates to 3 litres of milk a day. That's a lot.
Yeah.
However, if you break that down into, okay, what yogurt do we have? What cheese do we have? What, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we've had anecdotally some people come back and go, 12, I think, again, that's maybe another education piece out into the community, that volume is all dairy, not just literally 12 litres.
Yeah.
So, I do think it's a space where there's a real opportunity for us at scale to work at that with the big providers around the country to be able to get that back into the community. And hopefully that will happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I think there's a real opportunity there for people to geographically use what accessible resources that they've actually got to be able to make up those different categories as well. It doesn't have to all be satisfied in the same way. And that's the great thing, is that the guide gives us per the food groupings what would be reasonable levels to achieve within those groups. The guide itself allows some flex in there for farmer choice to kick in, but it's also, again, it's not a rigid, the measure itself is not rigid. It doesn't actually prescribe to you what you need to do. It offers a way of quantifying what you do. Yeah,
I certainly think, Tammie, as a first cut, it's really, really useful. And I think if the whole sector gets on board with using that as a guideline, we're going to be really well placed to service, because basically we're a service. We're all service organisations serving those who need help, and I think it's a really good guideline to get us there.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing to probably think about, I guess, is the kind of the future of the dairy space, right? It seems to be a sort of nutritional food group which is on the decrease in terms of dietary choices around ethics and environmental and that kind of thing. So is that something you take into account as well when you're thinking about the dairy space and sort of the alternatives to the oat milks and the coconut milks and all these kinds of things?
Absolutely. We work with all the providers, and I would hesitate to push back on any donations, but what we've done is, again, it's education as well, that the front line and the communities that we deal with. Just as an example, we work with BC, which is a new product on the market before cow. It's goat's milk. It's fantastic. Honestly, it's a really, really good product. It's called BC. It's just really brand new. When we put that into some of our local frontline organisations, there was a real kind of, I'm not sure if my people, my community would like this, would want this. So there is sometimes a little bit of that plant-based meat, for example. Really good product, and we have put a bit of that in there, but again, there's a hesitancy. So over time, I think as the community becomes more environmentally at all levels conscious, then those products will be as welcomed as any other.
Cool. Hey Gavin, really appreciate your time for that. We don't have any more questions at the moment, but again, please, if you want to use that Q&A function, there's still a little bit more time to ask a question for any of us who are here in the presenting role. So please do jump in there and ask a question, ask away. And if you're asking in the chat, you might be in the wrong space. So I'll just double check there's none in the chat sector. Yep, Dawn's done a plug for Afra. Go Dawn, woo woo. You can check that out in the chat function. Totally cool. Do feel free to plug any other thoughts you have as well that you want to share with the whole group into the chat function. That's all good as well. Good to see some regional responses there.
Yeah, great to see you all talking as well. Again, if you haven't already done it, include your name, maybe your organisation and the area that you're in case other people do want to collaborate or have a chat with you in your particular area. Maybe it's a good time to answer Emma's question.
Go for it.
Yeah, so Emma asked if after 12 weeks of supporting a whānau with food parcels, is it still okay and will food parcels still be available? Yes, Emma, delivery still comes down to the actual site and the food bank and the organisation. It's your choice and it's at your discretion how long you support whānau. We put 12-week in as a cap duration for the sake of making it a temporary relief, but you'll know your whānau best and you'll know if they need a shorter or longer duration, and that's still absolutely at your autonomy. The measure does not stop you just because you use it doesn't stop you from continuing on. So yes, 12-week is the recommended cap duration because like we said, we ideally we're treating food parcels as a temporary response. And if it's longer term, then we're addressing some more of the systemic root causes as to why we have food insecurity, but absolutely at your discretion. So yes, you can continue to give them food parcels after 12 weeks if needed.
So just to recap, these guys and the research behind it is available in PDF form on the Kore Hiakai Zero Hunger Collective website.
Yes, it is. So if you go on to our Zero Hunger website, we have a resources section, and in that resources section, there is a category that's called the Aotearoa Standard Food Parcel Measure. And in there, you will find the original piece of research, which is what is a food parcel, which has all the survey recipients' responses in there, and which led us to our key findings and the key recommendations. And then ultimately, there's also the part 2, which most food banks have found the most handy. To some degree, the research itself has become a little subsidiary. The main conversation that we're having at the moment is the measure itself and how to actually satisfy the nutritional elements. And so that part 2 guide is also downloadable as well. If for whatever random reason you have problems downloading, just email me direct. I can organise to send you a soft copy, and I do have some limited hard copies left. But yeah, they are definitely accessible through our website.
And just like these are a resource, you are a resource as well?
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, by all means, I am a reasonable port of call for you if you come to Kore Hiakai and want to talk about the measure. I've got a number of pilot organisations that I've been working with since July who have actually been trialling it. I actually would like to bring more on board. I think that it's a really good consistent measuring tool that we all should be ascribing to use. Because it will actually give us some consistency within our sector and what we're doing. And it's just a really responsible approach, to be fair. So I think it leans into those collaborative conversations that we absolutely need to have in terms of that systemic arm, but definitely in terms of those immediate responses that we know food banks need. Please download those resources or tap into me if you need to.
And this is the 4th webinar of our Just Kai series, and just like the previous 3, it has been recorded and will be available hopefully over the next week or 2 through either the Community Research YouTube account. You can just search Community Research NZ on YouTube, on the Googles, and you'll find it there. You can also find it through our MSD Food Secure Communities webpage as well as a host of other information about current alert levels and how we're moving into the new COVID protection framework. So do keep in touch with our website there to see the changes as that comes through into the traffic light system, we're going to put the most recent advice as soon as possible into that web page. So you're up to date with the latest government advice there. And you can also check on previous Panelists as well, which is a rich information resource. Well, that is all our time we have. So if it's all good with everyone, thanks again to all our participants. Thanks to Tammie for being an awesome co-host and presenter. Thanks to Zucchi, thanks to Gavin. You guys are amazing and your mahi is just absolutely phenomenal. Thank you to every one of those who has joined us today. Again, we know how busy it is at this time of year, and we know that just taking an hour out of your time is a big sacrifice. And so we appreciate you for joining us today. Do share the link with your friends and colleagues. So just want to finish with a karakia. Tui e romo, tui e rau, tui e waho, tui e roto, tui e te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, homi e, hui e, tā kia. Kia ora everyone.